Ubot Studio is a powerful web automation software which allows you to quickly and easily build scripts and bots. These bots can be compiled and run as a standalone application. Ubot features a visual scripting system which allows you to drag out nodes and fill in their parameters rather than writing code. These nodes are translated into UScript, which you can also directly write while in code view. Ubot uses a procedural programming paradigm, so there are no classes or objects. While programming in Ubot, you'll be creating custom commands and functions which can be accessed by any part of the program. There are a few different versions of Ubot Studio. Now this is a developer edition, which is the most featured. If you have another edition, yours may look slightly different, but don't worry because most of the stuff we're going to talk about in this video will work in any edition. This is the scripting area. The scripting area is where you can drag commands in order to create a script. You can find the commands by looking under the commands section of the toolbox. So here's the toolbox, this wrench icon. You can click on commands and then expand the subsections to view the commands inside of them. So let's create a hello world script. I'm going to go under the flow commands section, and all the way at the bottom I'm going to find this alert command. And then I'm just going to type hello world and press run. And there you go. I just want to take a quick moment to tell you about my new ebook, How to Write Clean Code, Guidelines for Maintainable Ubot Code. This is a free ebook which covers several techniques to help you write better code in Ubot. The first couple of chapters talk about refactoring and naming conventions, and I believe that both beginners and advanced users will benefit from reading these first couple of chapters. And from there, we talk about more advanced topics, which I believe will benefit intermediate users all the way up to experts. This ebook is free, so go ahead and click the link in the description below to download it right now. So we can run a script by pressing the run button. Scripts are ran from top to bottom, and each command is called one after the other. The run button will run the script in the current tab. To add another script, we can press the add new script button. So we can come up to this plus sign here, press that, and now we've added another script. So I can click this one to view our first script, and now I can click back here to view our second. So let's go ahead and name this script. I'm just going to name it Hello Ubot. And I'm going to add another alert command here, but this time, instead of dragging it out from over here, I'm going to search the toolbox. You can search the toolbox by clicking up here in the search toolbox text box, or when this isn't selected, you can hit Control E and type out your command or part of your command to find it. This time I'm going to say Hello Ubot. So now that I've created a new script, let's go ahead and run this script. So when I run this script, it says Hello Ubot. So let's go ahead and create another script. Let's name this one time. This time I want to use a function. So I'm going to drag out another alert command here, but this time instead of typing something in, I want to use a function. You can find functions under the parameters section in the toolbox. Just like the commands, you can expand these, and they have subsections, and you can expand each of these to find functions. Now the subsection that I'm looking for is called time functions, and I'm looking for the date function. Now I want to show this date to the user, but when I drag it out into the commands section, you can see that there's actually a cancel sign. It's not allowing me to drop it in the scripting area. And that is because the scripting area only allows commands, which is why you can see right here, it says drag commands here. So how can we use this function? Well, first we need to use a command directly in the scripting area, which is why I've already put an alert here. Now in this alert command, we have a parameter named message. I go ahead and expand that, and you can see there's this parameter, this text box here where we can put something. In this parameter field, we can type normal text, or we could use functions here. So you already saw me type hello world and hello Ubot in this text box. But what we can actually do is we can actually drag functions into there like so. As you can see, I can now drop this function within this text box. And then I could continue typing as well. but let's just get rid of that for now. So let's go ahead and press OK and run this. As you can see, it's now going to alert the current date and time. So the difference between commands and functions is that commands perform an action and functions return data. Our alert command is performing the action of displaying a message to the user. And our message just so happens to be a function. That function is returning the data to the message parameter, in this case, the date. Now I know this might be a little bit confusing for some, and so I'm just going to say that one more time, but in reverse order. Date is a function that returns data. Our date function simply is going to return the date. In fact, if you hover over it, you can read the text box that says returns the current date. So that means anywhere I put this date function, it's essentially going to be replaced with today's date. Our alert command has a parameter which says message. And anything we put in the message parameter will be displayed to the user. Because we put the date function in the message parameter, we will see the date when we run the script. Now, some functions have parameters of their own. Let's go ahead and look at a function that's called trim. I'm just going to search the toolbox for this one, but I believe it's under the text functions here. This function has a parameter named text. And when we put a bunch of spaces before our text, the trim function will remove any leading or trailing white space. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put maybe a few line breaks there and a bunch of space and say hello. Run this, and as you can see in our alert box, it just gets rid of all of that white space in front of it. But that's not the main reason I wanted to show you the trim function. The main reason I wanted to show you this function was to point out that functions can contain parameters as well. And something you should know about parameters is that they can only contain plain text, functions, selector code, and data types, which we will get to soon. So that means I can't put a command inside of a parameter. So if I use this trim function, I can't drag say a navigate command inside of here, or any command for that matter. It doesn't matter what it is. I can, however, put functions inside of this parameter. So I can put a spin function here, and now the spin function has a parameter named text to spin. And maybe that text that I want to spin is this replace, and maybe the original text was the date and the search text was whatever. Doesn't matter. It's just an example. As you can see, you can put functions inside of parameters. Sometimes parameters want a specific thing, such as a data type or selector code. In these cases, the parameter will have a different color. So let's go ahead and look at a command that's called increment, which is under the data commands. This has a parameter for a variable, specifically for a variable. And we can tell that because it has a purple background and it says variable here. Now, if we look at the bottom of this parameters section here, we can see the last three subsections are variables, lists, and tables. And if I go ahead and expand those, you'll see that they all have a unique color. Now, these are the data types in Ubot Studio. And a variable is the simplest data type. And as you can see, a variable is purple, by the way. So that's why this background is purple, because this parameter is expecting a variable and only a variable. Now, a variable is the simplest data type. It allows you to store a string inside of it, which can be called later. And to create a variable, we can use the set command. So I'm just going to hit cancel on this for now. And back under our commands, data types, we can use this set command. And as you can see, it expects a variable here, and we can just name our variable to create a new variable. So let's name this num. Num for number. Let me just name this number, and we'll set this to be 1. Now, anywhere we use this variable, this number variable, it will essentially be replaced with whatever data is inside of it. So let's first alert this variable and then increment it. We're going to drag out an alert, and we're just going to use this variable. And how do we use this variable? Well, a couple different ways. One, we can type number in here like so. which works fairly well. But if we had some text before that, and then type number, you can see that it doesn't really work so well then. Another option is we can drag it in. And if we have some text before that, we can see that that option works as well. But generally, you're going to have a lot of variables. You're going to have more variables than any other data type in nearly every program you make. So probably one of the better ways to do it is to search the toolbox. So again, you could have some text here, and you can hit Control E and then start searching for your variable and drag it in here. So that's probably the best way. So let's just go ahead and alert this. Now I want to increment this variable. So let's go ahead and find that increment command. Just gonna do that real quick. And now I'm just gonna copy this. So Control C, Control V, like so. And that's just gonna paste it as plain text. If I come up to the search box and paste it, you'll see that it's pasting it. And now I want to alert this again. Now what I can do instead of dragging another alert command is I can click on this, and you can't see it with this dark theme, but this is actually now highlighted with a little border around it. And I can hit Control C and click down here in this drag commands here and Control V. And I can just paste that whole command. So we're gonna set this number to be 1. We're gonna alert that and show that it's 1. We're then gonna increment it, which means add 1 to it. And then we're going to alert that again. So let's go ahead and run that. So we get 1. And then we're incrementing it by 1. And so now we get 2. So that's what a variable is. And we talked a little bit about the variable input, or the variable parameter. Now there's 2 other data types in Ubot. There's lists and there's tables. Lists store a collection of strings. We can set up a basic list by using the add list to list command. So I'm just going to create a new script here, and I'm going to find the add list to list command, which is under the data commands. In this case, the parameter is asking for a list, and so that means that we can't put a variable here. So I can't drag my number into here, it won't let me. We also can't put something like the date function. So if I come up here and find that date function, it won't let me drag that in there either. However, we can put a function named list from text. So if I come into the data functions, we can put a function named list from text. Really, we should be putting this on the bottom one. Don't put this on the top one. I know I was showing the first 2 on the top one, but just as a note here, I should have been putting them on the bottom one. Now the reason we can put this particular function in this list parameter is because this is going to return a list. So it's saying list from text. So it's taking the text and it's turning it into a list. And that's why in this special case, and there's a few cases like this, but I just want to show you that in some special cases, you can put functions even when it expects a certain data type like a list, because this is returning a list. Because remember, functions return data. And if this returns a list, and this accepts a list, then they're compatible. So this is a very common way to create lists. You use the add list to list command, and you use the list from text function. Now let's give this list a name. Let's name it numbers. And for the text, let's say 1 through 5. So what I did there is I put 1, 2, 3, and so on without any spaces. And the delimiter is a comma. So that means that anytime it sees a comma, it's going to say, okay, that's another new list item. So it says, this is a list item. I see a comma. So now this is a list item and I see a comma, which means the next thing is a new list item. And so we can hit OK, and this will then add 5 items to our list. So I'm just going to run that. So great, now we have a list called numbers with 5 items on it. But we really didn't get any feedback from Ubot. Like nothing popped up and told us like, good job, you just created a list. So how do we actually see the data inside of this list? Now this is where the debugger comes into play. And to view the debugger, you can go up to the view menu item and then come down to debugger, like so. Alternatively, and probably the way you should do it, is by hitting Control D. If you come up to View and you look at the debugger, it says the shortcut right there in case you forget it. It's a lot easier to just hit Control D, and so you'll probably see me doing that for the rest of the video. Now the debugger will show you all of the variables, lists, and tables in your entire project. So I'm not talking about just this tab. As you can see, we can see the number variable, which is over here on this time tab. But now we're in this new tab. We'll just name this like list. We'll just name it list. Now that we're in the list tab, we can see that we see both our list as well as the number variable over in this time tab. And so this debugger is going to show you all of the data types, the variables, the lists, and the tables in your entire project. And it will show you the values. So this is the value. Here's the name. Here's the values column. It's going to show you the values of all global data types. Because everything is set to global by default, we can see our list and our variable values. And don't worry too much about what global means right now, because everything's set to global by default. So by default, you can see everything. So let's go ahead and expand the value of our list, the 5 items. And now we can see the 5 items on the numbers list. So now let's start using this list with some of the most common list commands and functions. Usually, it's a good idea to clear lists before using them. And the reason for this is because data persists in Ubot until it is either cleared, or you create a new project in Ubot, or you close Ubot. So that means that even before I set the data in this list again, I can use it because we've already set the data from the last time we pressed run. So let's go ahead and see that in action. So remember, we already pressed run once and we set the numbers on this list. And we can see in the debugger that our numbers list has 5 items. Now, I'm going to use an alert command. And now I'm going to use a function called list total. And we can select our list from this dropdown. We can copy it from here. You can find it down here. There's a bunch of ways to find the name of this list. Hit OK, and I press run. And as you can see, the list total of our numbers list is 5, even before we added any items to the list. And that's because, once again, data persists in Ubot. So our data was still there from the last run. Now, after we had alerted that there were 5 items on the list, we then ran this command again that said add list to list, numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So pop quiz, how many items are currently on this list? Are there 10 items on the list? Because we added 5 more items, right? Let's look in the debugger. It still says that there's 5 items on our list, even though we just added 5 more. So what's going on here? Well, the reason for this is because when we went to add the numbers the second time, Ubot found that they were all duplicate items, and so Ubot removed those numbers from the list after adding them. Now, there's actually an option under Advanced here that says delete duplicates, so we can change that to say don't delete. And now let's see what happens. So once again, we have 5 items. We're going to see that in the alert anyway. I can press run, it says 5. It then adds 5 more. Now we have 10 items. So it says 10, and it adds 5 more. And now we have 15, and it adds 5 more. And now we have 20, and it adds 5 more. And this time, I'm not going to run this. I want to show you something else. I can run an individual command by right-clicking on it. So maybe I don't want to add the items to the list. I just want to test something in this one command. Let's go ahead and right click on this and run it. And as you can see, we now have 25 items on the list. And if we look in the debugger, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So going back to what I was saying earlier about how we wanted to usually clear lists before we use them because data persists in Ubot, let's go ahead and do that now. So now I'm going to clear this list before I use it. And now I'm going to copy this alert and I'm going to paste it down here so that we can see that it's been cleared. So we have 25 items on our list and we add 5 items to our empty list. And as you can see, we now have 5. Let me go ahead and run this individually. So here's a run, and now we have 0. So one of the most common ways to use lists is to iterate over the collection using each one of the items. And in order to do that, we're going to need to use a loop. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this alert up top and bottom. And I'm going to come under the flow commands and find something called loop. As you can see, it says it runs the contained commands a specified number of times. Let's go ahead and drag that out. Now, if you recall from the alert commands, we use a nifty little function called listTotal, which told us how many items were on the list. Now, when we're programming a bot, we're probably not going to know how many items are on a particular list if we're maybe scraping or getting maybe user information from somebody like accounts, things like that. So what we can do is use this listTotal to dynamically loop for any number of items which are on the list. So let's go ahead and do that. So if there's 5 items on our numbers list, then we're going to loop 5 times. If there's 3 items, then we're going to loop 3 times. Now I'm going to drag out an alert here, and I want to display each one of these numbers to the user. And the way that we can do that is by using a function called nextListItem. As you can see, it says it returns the list item at the list's current position and increments the list position. So that means on each iteration of this loop, it's going to grab the next item in the list. So let's just run this and see what happens. When we run this, it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as you would expect. Now there's one more thing I want to mention here, and that's the fact that in Ubot, lists and tables start their positions at 0. So the first item on the list is at position 0, and the second item is at position 1. If we open the debugger, you'll see what I mean. When we look at the numbers list, and we look at the value, on the left side there's a bolded number. That's the position. So our first item, which just happens to be a 1, is at position 0. Our second item, 2, is at position 1. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're working with lists and tables. Speaking of tables, let's create a new tab. The final data type in Ubot is a table. A table has rows and columns, and you can think of it like a spreadsheet. Behind the scenes, a table is literally a 2D string array. Much like a list, it's usually a good idea to clear your tables before using them. Again, don't forget that data will persist in a bot between runs. Let's go ahead and create a new table. And the way that I'm going to create this new table is by literally just clearing the table first. So let's go ahead and add a person to our table. Now there's a few ways that we can add data to a table. If I just search create table from, you can see we can create table from emails, from Excel, from file, from text. Now some of these may be in this bot bank. We're going to ignore all of these for now. We're just going to talk about Ubot's like main core. So for now, just know that there are several different ways you can create tables. Now most of these ways are going to expect some form of CSV file or some form of CSV formats. CSV stands for comma separated value. So if you have a CSV file, you could use the create table from file command, for example, to easily import a table. But in this case, we're just going to keep it simple and use a command called set table cell right here. And what I want to do in this particular table is I want to make sure that the first row is sort of like a header row and it explains what the column or what each row underneath it does. So let's create a people table. So row 0, column 0. This represents the first cell. If you think of a spreadsheet, it would be the cell in the top leftmost position. Remember that positions start at 0 in Ubot. So if we put 1 here, we'd be in the second position. So just keep that in mind. So let's say first name. Now I'm just going to copy and paste this because I want about half these values. I'm going to change the column to now be 1, and I'm going to say last name. Once more, I'm going to copy and paste. Change the column to be 2, say age. Now if I run this right now and we look in the debugger, you'll see that we have this little table or spreadsheet, if you will, that says first name, last name, and age. And now we can add a person to our table. Because we're clearing the table up top here, I don't have to worry about resetting these, and actually it doesn't really matter because these are setting specific cell values so that we're not adding any extra data to a list, for example. These would just be overwriting the same values. But for now, let's just add a person. So I'm going to do another set table cell. Choose people. This time we want it to be row 1. Column 0, we'll say first name, we'll say Mary. We copy, paste that. 1, last name Jones. And she is 35. Again, we can run this, we can look in the table, and now we have a person, Mary Jones, who is 35. Now we can retrieve specific information from a table. If we only wanted to get, say, one individual table cell, what we could do is let's drag out an alert. We could use a function that just is called table cell under the data functions here. And we could specify a specific cell. So we could say row 1, column 1. So what is Mary's last name? And I'm going to right click and run this, and Mary's last name is Jones. Now, much like how list had a list total, tables also have a function called table total rows. And so if we wanted to iterate over that, we could just use the table total rows, and we would need to increment a variable to get each row. In this case, I want to keep things super simple. I'm just going to alert the table total rows right here, and we can see that there are 2 rows in our table. So now let's go ahead and talk about the if command. The if command is used for making decisions in your program. Let me drag it out real quick. It takes one parameter, which expects a true or false statement. So this is a parameter conditioned to run commands, and this expects a true or false statement. So at the most basic, you could literally write true or false to see how this command works. So if I put true, and then I'm going to put an alert here that says true, copy that down here, it says false. And this is the flow of how the if command works. If the condition is true, then the commands inside of this then command are ran. And if the condition is false, then the commands inside of this else command are ran. So if I run this, we see that the condition is true, obviously, and we can see this purple highlight around here, which means that's what's currently running, and that command runs. And if I hit OK, you can see that Ubot isn't running anymore, and we do not run the commands inside of else. And of course, if I say false in here, we will see that false runs instead. So the if command is generally used with the qualifier function. So if we come under the parameters here, let me just close all this. The top one is called qualifier functions. And this is usually what you're going to be using with the if command. So some of the most common qualifier functions you're going to see are contains. So as it says, returns whether or not the specific text contains the search text. Another one you're going to see a lot is exists, which says returns whether or not an element exists on the current page. And another one is comparison. So let's just briefly show these. So contains, let's say that the text is headphones. Does headphones contain the text phone? Yes. Yes, it does. Another one is exists. And this is kind of getting into some web browser stuff that I'll talk about later, so just bear with me here. I'm basically going to say, does that button exist on the page? And yes, it does. And maybe if I said subscribe, well, no, that element does not exist now. And a really common one, perhaps the most common, is comparison. You can compare two different things. You could drag functions into here. There's a lot you can do with this. And you can use these conditional operators in here. You can type them like so, or you can select from this drop down like so. You could say, does 5 equal 3? And no, it does not. All right, so moving on, I want to talk about the UI commands. UI commands allow you to accept input from the user. So let's look at a really basic one. You can see these UI commands here. Let's look at the text box. Now, UI text box allows you to accept a string from the user. That string is then stored in a variable that you can call. In this example, we will ask the user for their name and then display it via an alert. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so I'm just going to alert my name. We use the UI text box in the UI area here. When you drag out one of these UI commands, you can see it now creates this new area. And this is the UI area that works with most of these particular commands. When the user types into this text box here, it sets this variable. And if you watch the debugger, you'll see that it sets it in real time. So just something to keep in mind is this variable has already been set. So when I press run, it's not really like running the UI text box, if that makes sense. It kind of skips over it and just runs the alert. Let's look at another one, UI password. This one is basically the same thing, except it masks the characters. You can still see them in the debugger, but you can't see them on the UI. There's one called block text, if I can find it. This we'll say like blog post. This will allow you to basically have a larger input field and press enter and things like that. There is a checkbox which will have a Boolean value. So we could say, we could say mail, something like that. And, the user could check this and it would change this to be true, or uncheck it and change it to be false. So that's how you could have a true false Boolean, if you will. There are open file and save file. So open file. I actually can't really show you this one because in this current version, there is a bug with the open and save file. This is 6 or Ubot Studio X, if you will, but version 6 just came out. So right now there's a bug which won't really set this properly. So I'm not going to go over those, but basically it's a way to get files. It's a way to get the path of a file. All right, I want to show you 2 more important ones and one more sort of important one. UI dropdown is pretty important. This one allows you to set a list of values that the user could choose. So I could say, let's do numbers. And we already have something called numbers, I think. So we'll just say number list or something. And this will allow the user to choose a value. And then what's nice about this is you can restrict the options. So with a text box, the user could put in anything. With this, they have to choose something. Now, one that's similar is list box. It's basically the same thing, except all the options are out there. And one more is button. I'm just going to type this in because it's faster for me. And buttons allows you to run commands inside of it. So I could say alert name. And then let's come up to edit and hit collapse top level nodes. We'll find that and drag it in here. And now when I press this button, it runs the commands inside of it. So one of the things that I kind of glossed over a little bit was the UI open and save file. And I should mention a little bit more about those. So UI open file allows you to choose a file that the user can open. It allows the user to choose a file to be opened. So if you wanted to let them say, select a CSV file to import into a table, you would use this. And if you wanted to save results, like let's say you're scraping something, you would use UI save file. That would allow the user to save a new file basically, or choose a file to be overwritten. Now both of these are going to give you a file path. And once you have a file path, you can do several things with that file. So let's go ahead and look under the commands. You see there's something called file commands. As you can see, you can do a bunch of stuff with files. And most of these just require a path and maybe one other thing. So in this particular case, saved a file. The user could have said, here's the CSV file. I want you to save the data from a scrape of, let's say, yellow pages. You can save a table. You can put a table in here. So let's say people, and it was, my CSV.csv, something like that. It would be the full path, of course. So you could save files, you could rename files, you can move files, delete files, copy files, and you can do most of this stuff with folders as well. And most of this stuff just simply requires the file path, and sometimes it'll require another path, but usually it requires just one other parameter. And in the parameters, we have file functions. So if you wanted to check if a file existed, you could just simply use this function, or if a folder exists, or you could get the files in a directory. So you can create your own custom commands and functions using the define command. And that is under the flow commands. And once you create your own custom command, it's actually going to show up in the toolbox and it'll be searchable as well. So let's go ahead and give this a terrible name. I'm going to name it my command. Like so. And I'm just going to alert hello from my command. And now when we look under the commands, there's a new section that says custom commands. We can see my command. Or we can search in the toolbox, and as you can see, it shows up there. Now that's important because if I run this right now, nothing happens, but we put an alert in here. And the reason is because we're just defining the command here. Ubot, when it's running and it sees one of these defines, it's just gonna skip over and keep on going. So let me show you an example. I can put my command here and run this. Now it says hello from my command. Or I can put it down here, for example, and now it says hello from my command again. But just once, and it's only running it when you call it. So if I put it above and below, we'll see it twice. Now another thing, you can add your own parameters into this command, and these parameters, of course, are variables. And these are local variables, by the way. I'm actually going to preface this with an underscore because it's a naming convention that I follow. And in this case, we can say hello, and I'm actually gonna have to hit OK right there. Because I have text in here, I gotta search the toolbox for that variable. And now when we use the command, it's gonna ask for a name. And I press run, it says hello Nick. So we passed in a parameter. That parameter was a variable. We then use that variable to display it via the alert command. So now I want to cover a few more things about the general Ubot interface. To compile a bot, you can hit File, Compile. And you're going to need to choose the output file down here. And you can set some various options. If you have the developer edition, you can set a bunch more options. But once you've chosen a file, all you need to do after that pretty much is hit compile. If you want to use Git, then you can hit File, Save as Project Folder. And what Save as Project Folder is going to do is it's going to separate, or it's going to save each script individually. So typically a Ubot file is going to be all compiled into one file. It's just going to be something.ubot. But if you save it as a project folder, it's going to use the folder and then save individual scripts in the folder. And what are scripts? Well, these tabs are scripts. So if I go into code view, it would basically be saving this code here into a file, a uscript file. And then it would, in that file would just, it would be a number. You know, this is name defined. Unfortunately, unless they do it in version 6, it's still pretty new. I haven't looked at that yet, but at least in version 5, they saved them all as numbers, which is kind of unfortunate. But regardless, that's a way that you could use get, and whenever you change the code and you save, it's obviously going to update those files, and then you can push it. Now, we've already showed this briefly before, but in the edit menu, you can collapse nodes. Let me find a different, here we go. So you can edit collapse all nodes, and this is going to collapse down all of the nodes, and you can expand all the nodes, and you could also do something called collapse top level nodes. Let me see here. So when I collapse top level nodes and I expand loop, you'll see that the alert inside of it is expanded as well. But if I collapse all nodes and I expand loop, you'll see the alert is now collapsed. So this is just a nice way to quickly collapse things and be able to find what you're looking for. Now there's another menu option called View. This has a ton of editors below the debugger. Obviously the debugger is very important, so you can find that here. But all of these editors, I'm not really gonna cover them. And honestly, you don't ever need to use them in order to use Ubot if you don't want to. Under the Tools menu, you can add CAPTCHA accounts. You can add various accounts like so. It's also where you're going to find the plugins menu, which is very important. You'll probably be using plugins a lot. So here you can add them when you want to add a new plugin, or let's say RoboBest here. If he updated this, I could just hit add and add the updated file, and it will replace this. This is where you could also remove them. And to activate a plugin, you can tick that. So I'm going to, let me tick one that you'll be able to see here. Okay, I'm going to tick Advanced Systems. Now watch the left side here, hit OK. And it needs an update. Let's just ignore that for now. You can see we now have access to all of these new commands that we did not before. And so I'm just going to untick that, hit OK, and now they go away. And now we're just left with the core commands in Ubot. Under the Options item, under Tools, you have various options, including the option to change the internal browser. So that's what this is. This option does require you to restart Ubot. That's what this little tiny text here says. So if I wanted to use Chrome 21, I hit OK. Nothing happens because the Chrome 67 is loaded right now, right here. I would have to restart Ubot, but I don't want to use that, so I'm going to change that back. This is also where you can change the theme. So this is what Ubot used to look like, except there's some little text bugs right now, but some color bugs, but let's just change that back to dark for now. So the green globe icon over here, this is the bot bank. If you are subscribed to Ubot updates, then you'll have access to these extra commands here. This blue wrench is the toolbox. This is, even if you're not subscribed to updates, then this is sort of like where the main commands that you'll be using are. The bot bank has some nice extra things, but for the most part, you'll probably be using commands and functions in here. Now, some editions have code view. You can click right here, or you can hit Control-I. Now, this isn't necessary to have in order to make bots, but it will make your life much easier in some situations. There's a button called Step here, and this is going to allow you to step through the code. I'm actually going to change this to the light theme real quick. So when I hit Step, you can see that there's a purple box around this node, and that's because it is running that node, or it just ran that node. and then it stops. So numbers is now cleared. If I press step, it now runs this node and it adds that. And then if I press step, it goes into the loop and we alert the next list item, which the debugger is now covering up. And if I press step again, it goes down, then it goes into the next one. So what step does is it allows you to step through the program one node at a time. Let's talk about the web browser. I'm gonna go to the simple form on the playground. When you load up Ubot, you're gonna have this page here. You can scroll down a little bit and click on visit the playground. And let's go to the simple form. And let's get rid of this annoying little pop-up. Okay, so when we are on the simple form in the playground, we can drag out a navigate command, and this is gonna be under the browser commands right up top here. And when we drag that out, it's gonna pre-populate the URL parameter with the current URL. And this is where we wanna navigate the browser to, so that's fine, we'll hit okay. Now let me go away from this URL and run this. And as you can see, it does navigate back to that URL. Now there are a couple of ways that we can interact with the internal web browser. We can click on the start recording button to record actions taken in the web browser. So let me do that. So I'm going to go to username, type user, tab into password, tab into first name, tab into last name, tab into about, and click the submit button. Oh, there we go. And don't forget to hit stop recording. And so now if I run this, you'll see that it actually goes here and it does a good job. It got everything just by recording it. So that is definitely one of the ways that you can interact with the web browser. Now another thing you can do is you can right click on a field that you want to interact with, and Ubot's going to suggest what it thinks you should use as a command. So in this case, type text, which would be the correct one. If I run this, you'll see that it does type the text there. So if I go to, well, these are all text boxes except for this. So let me right click on that and it changes to a click command, and we would indeed want to click on the button. We just want to do that last, of course. One other way is you can just click on the field and then drag it, and it will take that suggestion and basically just use that suggestion. So, it says type text right there, but you could just drag it out like so. If I try to drag out the button, it'll be a click command, as you can see. So those are a few ways. And finally, the last way is to just look at the field, know what it is, and say, oh, I know I need to type text there. So once you have a command that's chosen, you need to fill in the element selector parameter. So that's what this is with this yellowish color background. So in order to select an element on the page, you need to click on these green brackets icon. And then as you can see, as I hover over different elements on the page, they're highlighted in blue. So if I wanted to fill in this about me, I would just try and select this one text area and click on it. And as you can see, it does show up as something, and I can type about me and run that, and it does work. So once you have a command that is chosen, you need to fill in the element selector parameter, which we just did. And using some of these methods, an element will be filled in. In some cases, you won't have to modify this. However, sometimes you will need to modify this. And to do this, we need to use the advanced element editor. So let's say that I wanted to choose this button and it said value submit, but maybe so did 10 other things on the page, and it was giving me an offset here or something weird. Well, I would want to change this selector code. And to do that, we can click on this blue gear icon to go into the advanced element editor. In the advanced element editor, you can choose an HTML element on the left. So right now it's already taken us to this input. If I click on the paragraph tag above it, you can see we have the paragraph tag, and inside of that we have the input tag. If I go up to the form, we can now see that we can see the value of the entire form right here. And once the element is chosen, you can select attributes to target for this element. So if I wanted to target this form, let's say by the ID, I can come down to this attributes dropdown and select ID. And indeed, it does find that, and we see one match over here. And you can choose to target by more than one attribute. For example, maybe I want to target by the tag name and then add another one. And then by the, I'll just say ID again, which doesn't really make sense to do it this way, but it's just an example. And by adding more attributes like this, it helps you narrow down and target the exact element that you want. Another thing that you can do is you can use a wildcard or a regular expression in the value of the attribute here in order to help you target attributes that you think may change. Like if this was form-567, you may want to say form-star and use a wildcard, for example. I don't want to get into this too much because this is pretty far beyond the scope of this video. Just know that that is an option. All right, so let's go back to the resources page. So now let's look at an example of using scrape attribute, because scrape attribute is a pretty important function. It's going to be the main way that you're going to be scraping things in Ubot's browser. So I know on this page that there's a bunch of H3 tags, so let's go ahead and try and scrape them. I'm going to call it headers. I'm going to use this scrape attribute, which should be under the browser functions here. Right there. And I'm going to come down here and select one of these tags. As you can see, this is a case where it gives me this inner text. The reason it gives me this inner text is because Ubot's trying to figure out a way to single out this element. And the only way that it knows how in this particular case is by targeting the inner text, because no other elements have that inner text. So this is definitely one of those cases where you would want to change it. Most of the time you don't want to be targeting by the inner text because that could change. So let's go into the advanced element editor. And in this case, I actually want to get all of the tag names. And so we do have 6 matches. And that's why Ubot didn't want to target by the tag name. But that's okay. I'm just going to hit OK. And we're going to get the inner text. Press run. I'm going to actually clear out everything else in here and run this again, so that all that clutter is gone. And as you can see, we do have the 6 different headers. Now this works, but I probably want to put that into a list. So we can use add list to list. We can just name that headers as well. And right now we can actually drag scrape attribute into the list to add, because this could return a list. If you look in the debugger, this is essentially in a list format. There's items, 1 on each line. We can copy this by clicking in the middle of it like so, hit Control C, Control V to paste, and then select inner text. Run that, and as you can see, it actually does give us the 6 items on the list. But now let's say I only wanted to get the first header. Well, that's a problem. If you recall, Ubot had trouble selecting this particular header, which is the second header, by the way. So if I wanted to target this first header, let's see here real quick. Let's set a new one, call it first header. If I wanted to select that, okay, that one has an ID. Let's select the second header because it had trouble. There we go. Okay. So if I wanted to select the second header, then it's giving us this inner text, but I don't like that. I don't like targeting things by their inner text unless it's a last resort and I absolutely have no other choice, which is almost never. And so I want to go into the advanced element editor and look at this real quick. And I know that I want to target this by the tag because there's only 6 of them. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And of course, if I just use this right now, it's just going to give us the same result as headers. So I'll run that. We get 6. That's not what we want. We want the second one. So what I need to do here is I need to use another function called element offset. And as you can see, it says if an element selector matches more than one element, this allows you to return one of those elements. So I can drag that into the element selector code area here. And now inside of here, I can once again target this H3 tag. And then I can tell Ubot which one I want. Well, I want the second one, which is at the first offset. And the reason is because positions start at 0. Hit OK. And if you're following along at home and you like copied something into this element offset, it can be a little bit weird with scrape attribute. Sometimes this disappears. So just make sure that it's actually there. If it's like this, go ahead and expand that. Make sure that this function is actually there. Sometimes it disappears the first time. No idea why. Now when we run the command second header, we get video training in 10 minutes or less, which is what we were going for. And finally, there is a new command in Ubot Studio X called in external browser. It's under the browser commands here. And this will allow you to run Chrome or Firefox, and in the future, there will also be Phantom.js. And so what you can do is you can actually use the commands in Ubot and use Ubot's internal browser to build a script to run in an external browser. So let's go ahead and go back to the playground. We're going to go to the difficult form, and let's just go ahead and build a script. So I'm just going to drag out here, type username. We're just going to select a random country. And the submit button doesn't do anything, but we can try and click it anyway. We need to navigate, of course, to this page first. And then another thing, I like to give a little bit of leeway and some time to make sure the page loads. If you look under the advanced section for the navigate command, it actually has a parameter that says wait for page to load. And it says wait versus don't wait, which would continue executing the script immediately after navigating. So it would not wait for the whole page to load. In this case, it's supposed to, but I just like giving it like a good second or two just to be sure. So let's go ahead and run this. And it's navigating. And there we go. And there's that pop-up. And I get rid of that, and there we go. So there's all the stuff that we filled in. It chose a random country, and the submit button again does not do anything, so that's why it didn't go to a different page or anything. So this has been Ubot Studio X in one video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them below. But otherwise, please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.